One of the more memorable images from Spanish history depicts Queen Juana, known as Juana La Loca, with headdress streaming in the wind, standing over the coffin of her husband, Philip the Handsome. The scene depicts Queen Juana, who had fallen madly in love with Philip and could not be parted from his body after his sudden death. Was this the desperate act of a mentally ill woman who also had a family history of depression and mental illness? Or did she have some very rational reason for trying to drag his body all over the country? Juana was the third child of Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon. She was not expected to inherit either kingdoms from her parents. The first in line to the throne was her brother Juan, and the next in line was the elder sister Isabella. She showed some signs of nervous breakdowns and violent outbursts from young age, so she was regarded as the problematic child among the siblings. As she grew older, her parents started to arrange for her marriage. As was usual for any royal families at the time, her marriage would be a political affair for strategic alliance between the kingdoms. The elder sister, Isabella, was married off to Portugal. At that time, Castile and Aragon's greatest enemy was France. So, her parents looked for an ally to counterbalance France's power, and they found that ally in the Habsburgs based in Austria. So it was agreed that Juana's older brother Juan, who was the heir presumptive of Spain, would marry Emperor Maximilian I's daughter, Archduchess Margaret of Austria, and Juana would marry Maximilian's son, Archduke Philip. For her journey to Flanders for the wedding, Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand arranged a fleet of 133 ships and 15,000 men to accompany her. This was the most luxurious and extravagant trip people had seen not only in Castile, but in all of Europe. But the extravagance of the wedding preparations was not the only thing that piqued the excitement in the court. Even before Juana set off, her attendants started telling her about the rumors about her new husband. "Oh, Your Highness, have you heard? They say your groom is a stunningly handsome man." But Juana herself was rather nonchalant. How handsome could he really be? Probably just decent-looking compared to other royals. They're making such a fuss over nothing. She understood perfectly that this was just a marriage of political convenience. But then, there came the time to actually meet the groom for the first time. And when Juana saw Philip for the first time, her jaw dropped. Philip was extraordinarily handsome. He was, after all, called Philip the Handsome. And Juana couldn't believe it. From a young age, she perfectly understood that, as an infanta, she was to marry for political alliances, not for love. So she didn't have much expectations of love. For her, marriage was nothing personal, just business. But now, her betrothed turned out to be a breathtakingly handsome man. She could not believe her luck. She fell in love right there and then. Perhaps he was that handsome, or perhaps hemophilia ran in her family. After all, her mother, Queen Isabella, was said to have fallen in love at first sight with her father, King Ferdinand. And then, her elder sister Isabella also fell in love at first sight with her first husband, Alfonso of Portugal. So maybe this family had the tendency to fall in love quickly. Anyway, Juana decided that she cannot leave anything to chance. Originally, the plan was for them to spend some time getting to know each other, follow a set of schedule, and hold the wedding ceremony after that. But Juana didn't want to wait. Who knows what might happen if they waited? She insisted, "We must get married tomorrow." The courtiers and attendants protested that nothing was ready, but Juana was determined. She created such a scene that she left everyone with no choice. The wedding was hastily held the very next day, and people whispered among themselves, "The Spanish princess is surely temperamental." So their formal wedding was held on October 20th, 1496 in Lier, north of present-day Brussels. Juana enjoyed a dream-like honeymoon. From the beginning, their relationship was notoriously passionate. Juana was completely and entirely in love with Philip, and Philip was a loving husband. She was soon pregnant and gave birth to Eleanor in November of 1498. But soon, Juana began to feel a sense of unease. The reason? Her husband Philip was always busy, especially at night. It turned out that, although he was a loving husband to Juana at the beginning, his problem was that he was a loving man to a lot of women. He was a notorious philanderer and had constant string of lovers. Thanks to his good looks and his position, women from all over the country were vying for his attention, hoping to capture the prince's interest. This was unbearable for Juana, who already had a history of temperamental outbursts. And still, it wasn't like Philip was completely ignoring her. Juana was still getting pregnant, giving birth to Karl in 1500 and Isabella of Austria in 1501. But she became increasingly worried. What if Philip stopped loving her? What if she lost him altogether? Consumed by fear, she began to behave erratically. She would become suspicious of Philip and confront him, become angry and have outbursts. Then Philip would confine her in her chamber. Then, while confined in her chamber, she would grow even more suspicious of what her husband might be doing. Some historians say it was actually Philip who spread rumors about his wife's behavior, calling it a madness. Whether or not it was true, rumors about the new archduchess soon began to spread. She reportedly summoned a witch to perform rituals, which included sticking needles into dolls as part of the ceremony. Juana's actions and the resulting gossip only fueled her reputation for being unstable. And, in the middle of all this, a major upheaval was occurring back in Castile. Her brother Juan, who was the heir to the throne of Castile and Aragon, suddenly died. And with his death, the succession passed to their eldest sister Isabella, who was now the Queen of Portugal. But shortly afterwards, Isabella died in childbirth. The child Miguel was the next heir, but he also died when he was 2. This string of unfortunate deaths left Juana as the next in line for the throne. She was urgently summoned back to Spain to be confirmed as the heir and to start learning how to manage the dual kingdoms of Castile and Aragon. So in 1502, 6 years after she left Spain for her marriage with Philip, she came back, this time with her husband. About 2 years into her stay in Castile, her mother, Queen Isabella I of Castile, died in 1504. This made Juana the queen. Her father, Ferdinand, was the king of Castile only because he was the husband of the queen. Now, that role passed to Philip. But Ferdinand was not about to let go of that power easily. Philip, on the other hand, wouldn't want to miss out on his chance to rule Castile. They both claimed the right to rule the territory. In 1506, Philip and Ferdinand finally met in person and came to an agreement. Ferdinand promised to hand over the control of the kingdom to Juana and Philip, and both men also agreed that they will keep Juana from getting involved in governing the kingdoms. This compromise did not last long. Only a few months later, Philip died of sudden illness in September of 1506 while they were staying in Burgos. Some say it was typhoid fever, but rumors soon swirled around that it was poison sent from Ferdinand. And for Juana, it was as if her entire world had collapsed. Her beloved husband was suddenly gone, and it was just when she thought she finally managed to claim him entirely as her own. While they were in Flanders, he was surrounded by mistresses all the time, but since he had been brought to Spain, those ties were at least temporarily severed. And now, just when Juana believed she had him entirely to herself, he was gone. The shock was too much for Juana. Overwhelmed by grief, she had a breakdown and began to exhibit signs of severe mental instability. Her behavior became increasingly erratic. She refused to bury her husband. Instead, she began searching for the most reputed monks, believing their prayers could bring him back to life. Juana traveled across the country with Philip's corpse, determined to find someone capable of performing this miracle. The journey was grueling. As Philip's body began to decay, the smell of the corpse and the strain on those accompanying Juana became unbearable. The sight of the procession was one of exhaustion and despair. Yet Juana remained resolute. She would have the attendants open Philip's coffin and gaze at his decaying body. She traveled hundreds of miles to a monastery reputed for its holy miracles. Upon arrival, Juana would send her attendants ahead to inquire if there were any nuns present. If the answer was yes, Juana would refuse to enter, fearing that if Philip were revived, the nuns might try to seduce him. She would then move on to the next monastery. This erratic behavior fueled the rumors of her madness. Initially, people viewed her as a victim of her father Ferdinand's power grabs. But as Juana's bizarre actions became widely known, public sentiment turned against her. Who could trust a queen who behaved so irrationally? And her father Ferdinand did not miss this chance. He confined Juana to a remote convent in the countryside, isolating her from the public and political affairs. Over time, Juana's mental state deteriorated further in her seclusion. A haunting painting by Francisco Padilla depicts Juana's plight during this period. In this painting, Juana sits by a window with vacant, unfocused eyes. In front of her, her youngest daughter is crying and calling out for her mother, yet Juana pays her no attention. She stares into the void, lost in her despair. Two attendants sit nearby, not only tasked with assisting Juana, but also ensuring she remained under constant supervision. This was Juana's existence for the rest of her life, isolated, watched, and succumbing to her worsening mental illness. And things didn't improve for Juana even after her father Ferdinand died in 1516. After Ferdinand, it would have been natural for Juana to inherit the throne. But, given her condition, her eldest son Carlos was crowned as the co-monarch of Castile and Aragon. He became Carlos I of Spain, and later Holy Roman Emperor Karl V. But even with her son now in power, she remained in confinement. Her condition kept deteriorating as time passed. She was convinced that the nuns caring for her actually wanted to kill her, and she struggled to sleep, eat, or even to change her clothes. She eventually became bedridden and died in 1555 at the age of 75. So, this was the more widely known version of Queen Juana's story, giving rise to her popular moniker Juana La Loca, or Juana the Mad. But was she the crazy woman who dragged her husband's corpse around the country simply to have him revived with prayers? Maybe, or maybe not. Let's take it from the top. Was she a problem child from young age, prone to erratic outbursts? There is no concrete evidence of this. On the contrary, she was known for her intelligence as a young woman. It was only after her marriage with Philip that concerns around her mental illness arose. What about her jealousy and outbursts? It is undisputed that Philip was a notorious philanderer. Was her anger an overreaction of a crazy woman? Or was it a natural reaction of a sensitive and passionate woman suffering episodes of postpartum depressions while being ill-treated by her cheating husband? She was, after all, practically imprisoned by her husband for no clear reason whatsoever other than the alleged mental illness. As for her husband and her father, both declaring her unfit to rule, both men had a lot to gain from removing her from the power. And people who met her during this period, including her father-in-law, Maximilian I, and foreign ambassadors, considered her behavior to be perfectly normal. As for her refusal to bury her husband and traveling all over the country with his body, some historians believe that she was transporting his body to be buried in Granada, where her mother was buried, and was deliberately making a point of making multiple stops at various cities to remind people who was the legitimate ruler of Castile. Her opening her husband's coffin, we should also remember that there was a suspicion that he was poisoned. Sometimes, the poisoned corpse would show the signs of poisoning even as the body decays. Perhaps she had a perfectly good reason to check up on his body, such as looking for evidence of foul play, and perhaps she was doing so in front of potential witnesses. But whatever her reason was, her actions did more harm in the end. After Philip's death, Ferdinand had her surrounded by people loyal to himself, and stories of her behavior at this time helped her father's attempts to discredit her and continued to control Castile, over which he did not have any claim after Queen Isabella's death. As for Carlos, his mother was a threat to his right to rule over Castile while she lived. Keeping her in confinement for the rest of her life was an easy way to solidify his rule. It is true that, as her time in isolation went on, Juana's mental state began to decline. But after a lifetime of forced confinement by your own husband and by your father and then by your own son, wouldn't you go crazy? Many people also cite that she had an extensive family history of mental illnesses, with her grandmother Isabella of Portugal also being considered mad. But which royal family in Europe is entirely free of one or two people suffering from mental illnesses? So today we looked at the tragic life of Queen Juana. In our next video, we will continue to look at the story of this family, but this time following the story of Juana's younger sister Catalina, or better known as Catherine of Aragon. So please like and subscribe to continue receiving our stories from history. Also check out our playlists for the series on other countries and periods. It really helps a small channel like us.